My name is Natalie and I am 32. The snow was falling in heavy, rhythmic sheets against the bay window of my parents' estate, a sprawling Victorian home that always felt more like a museum of my failures than a place of warmth. I stood in the kitchen, smoothing out my daughter Lily's dress. She was 8 years old, a quiet girl with eyes like polished jade, and she was the only reason I had agreed to drive 5 hours through a blizzard to attend this dinner. I wanted her to have a family. I wanted her to know the smell of pine needles and the sound of a crackling hearth, even if those things came wrapped in the icy judgment of my parents, Eleanor and Arthur, and the sharp-tongued resentment of my younger sister, Chloe. The table was set with heirloom silver and bone china that cost more than my monthly rent. My father sat at the head, his face a mask of stern disappointment that hadn't changed since I dropped out of the prestigious law program he had handpicked for me a decade ago. Chloe sat opposite me, her engagement ring reflecting the candlelight with an offensive brilliance. She had spent the last hour subtly reminding everyone that her fiancé was a partner at a top-tier firm, while I was just a freelance consultant struggling to keep a roof over Lily's head. The air was thick with the scent of roasted turkey and the unspoken bitterness of years of estrangement. It started with a comment about Lily's grades. My mother tilted her head, her pearls clinking softly. "Natalie, we heard Lily is struggling with her advanced math. It's such a shame. If you were home more often instead of chasing those small-time contracts, perhaps she would have the focus required for a girl of her lineage." I felt the familiar sting in my chest, but I kept my voice low for Lily's sake. "She's doing fine, Mom. She excels in art, and she's the kindest soul I know." My father slammed his fork down, the vibration rattling the crystal glasses. "Kindness doesn't pay the bills, Natalie. Look at you, 32, no husband, a crumbling apartment, and a child who can't even master the basics of a private school curriculum. You are a failed mother, plain and simple." The room went deathly silent. Lily froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, her bottom lip beginning to tremble. Chloe didn't look away. She smirked, taking a slow sip of her wine. "You really should leave and never come back," Chloe said, her voice dripping with a fake, sugary concern. "You're just a dark cloud over this family. You've always been the weak link." My father leaned forward, his eyes cold and devoid of any paternal warmth. "Take your things and leave. You two don't deserve to be with a real family. You are a drain on our reputation and a burden on this holiday." I looked at Lily. A single tear tracked through the faint dusting of freckles on her cheek. She didn't sob. She just looked at me with a hollow, heartbroken expression that broke something deep inside my soul. For years, I had taken their verbal abuse. I had played the role of the black sheep because I thought I owed them for my existence. But seeing them turn that cruelty on my daughter was the final snap of the cord. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt a strange, terrifyingly calm clarity wash over me. I reached into my coat pocket, which was draped over the back of my chair, and pulled out a single, heavy brass key with a distinctive crest engraved on the bow. I leaned forward and placed it dead center on the white linen tablecloth. I stood up and took Lily's hand. "Keep the dinner," I said, my voice as cold as the wind howling outside. "And keep the house. You're going to need a place to stay when the bank realizes who actually owns the deed to this land." My father laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "What are you talking about? This house has been in the family for 3 generations." I looked him dead in the eye and felt the first surge of the revenge I had been planning for 3 years. "It was in the family, Dad, until you used it as collateral for that failed shipping venture in Singapore. The one you thought no one knew about. The one my firm handled the liquidation for." I walked out the front door into the freezing night, holding Lily close. We got into my modest sedan, and I watched the silhouettes of my family through the window. They were huddled around the table, staring at the key. They didn't know yet that the key didn't just represent the house. It represented the office building Chloe worked in, the trust fund my mother relied on, and the very ground they stood on. I had spent years working under a pseudonym in the corporate restructuring world. building a shell company that had slowly, quietly, and legally devoured every asset my father had recklessly gambled away. A minute later, as I put the car into gear, my phone began to vibrate violently on the dashboard. It was my father, then a text from my mother, then Chloe. They had realized that the key matched the lock on the safe in the study, the one containing the final foreclosure notice I had signed off on that morning. They were calling me back desperately, their voices probably shifting from rage to begging in a matter of seconds. But I didn't answer. I drove into the whiteout, the red taillights of my car the last thing they would see of the daughter they had discarded. The first stage of my plan was complete. They thought they were throwing me out into the cold, but they were the ones who were truly homeless. They just didn't realize that the locks would be changed by morning, and every piece of furniture, every painting, and every memory in that house now belonged to the failed mother they had so casually insulted. This was only the beginning of the winter they would never forget. As the heater in my car hummed against the biting frost of the mountain pass, the glow of my phone screen was a constant, frantic strobe light in the dark cabin. My father called 6 times in 10 minutes. Then came the messages from Chloe, her tone shifting from her usual arrogance to a high-pitched digital panic. "Natalie, what did you do? Why is there a legal seal on the documents in the safe? Pick up the phone right now." I tossed the device into the glove box and shut the latch. I wanted them to sit in that silence for a while. I wanted them to look at the mahogany walls and the velvet curtains and realize that every inch of luxury surrounding them was now a hollow shell. I checked on Lily in the rearview mirror. She had stopped crying and was staring out at the blurred white landscape, her small hand clutching a stuffed rabbit. "Mom, are we going home?" she asked softly. I reached back and squeezed her knee. "We're going to a place much better than that, Lily, a place where no one will ever make you feel small again." I felt a fierce, protective fire burning in my gut. My parents had spent my entire life convincing me that I was a disappointment because I didn't follow their rigid, ancestral path. They didn't realize that by pushing me out, they had forced me to build a world they couldn't even comprehend while they were hosting galas and maintaining the facade of old money. I was working 18-hour days under the name Annie Thorne. I had specialized in predatory acquisition and corporate restructuring. I knew where the bodies were buried because I was the one who had been hired by the banks to dig the graves. 3 years ago, when my father's shipping empire began to hemorrhage cash due to his ego and a series of disastrous overseas investments, he didn't go to a traditional lender. He went to a private equity group known for its discretion. He didn't know that the group was a subsidiary of a holding company I had spent my life savings to control. He had literally signed his life over to the daughter he called a failure, and he was too blinded by his own pride to read the fine print. We arrive at a sleek, modern hotel on the outskirts of the city. I checked us into a suite using my professional name. As Lily fell into a deep, exhausted sleep on the plush king-sized bed, I sat by the window with my laptop. The notifications were rolling in from my security team. They had arrived at the estate. I had instructed them to remain at the edge of the property until midnight, giving my family a few hours to sit with their terror. At 12:01 a.m., the grace period ended. The first thing I did was freeze the secondary accounts. My mother's credit cards, which she used to fund her social standing and her collection of vintage jewelry, were tied to the estate's operating budget. By 1:00 a.m., she would find that her cards were declined at any late-night pharmacy or petrol station. Next was Chloe's car. It was technically a company vehicle registered to the family firm. I sent a digital command to the GPS tracking and recovery service to disable the ignition. She wouldn't be driving to her fiance's penthouse tonight. I opened a bottle of water and watched the snow settle on the pavement below. I remembered the way my father looked when he told me I was a useless daughter. He had said those words while standing on a rug that I had technically paid for 6 months ago. The irony was a bitter tonic. I wasn't doing this just because of the dinner. I was doing this because for 32 years, They had treated people like chess pieces. They viewed empathy as a weakness and wealth as a birthright. They needed to learn that when you strip away the money and the titles, all you're left with is the character of the person standing next to you. And they had spent decades ensuring they had no one left to stand by them. My phone vibrated in the glove box again, the muffled sound echoing in the quiet car park. I finally went back to the car to retrieve it. There was a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was cracked, stripped of its usual rehearsed elegance. "Natalie, please. Your father is having chest pains. We can't get the gate to open. The electronics aren't responding. We're locked in. Tell us this is a mistake." I knew my father's chest pains were likely the result of a bruised ego rather than a failing heart. But I called the local non-emergency line and requested a wellness check for the property, ensuring the gate codes were provided to the authorities. I wasn't a monster. I just wanted them to experience the helplessness they had inflicted on me for years. I spent the rest of the night reviewing the final phase of the acquisition. It wasn't just the house, it was the legacy. By Monday morning, the local papers would receive a press release about the rebranding of the Thorne Group. The name Thorne would be scrubbed from the building downtown, replaced by a foundation dedicated to supporting single mothers and educational grants for children like Lily. I was going to erase my father's name from the city he thought he owned. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, casting a pale blue light over the snow, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a decade. I looked at Lily, sleeping soundly, safe from the poison of her grandparents. They wanted me to leave and never come back. I was happy to oblige, but I was taking the ground from under their feet as I went. The next time they saw me, it wouldn't be as the daughter they could bully. It would be as the woman who held their entire future in the palm of her hand. The morning sun of December 26th hit the glass of the hotel suite with a blinding, clinical light. I sat at the small desk, the hum of my laptop the only sound in the room while Lily still slept. The silence was a luxury I hadn't enjoyed in years. For the first time, the weight of the Thorne family name wasn't a millstone around my neck. It was a tool in my hand. I opened the live feed from the security cameras I had installed at the estate months ago under the guise of a routine tech upgrade. The scene playing out on my screen was a chaotic masterpiece of poetic justice. My father was standing on the grand front porch, wrapped in a silk robe that was far too thin for the sub-zero temperatures. He was shouting at two men in dark uniforms, private security contractors I had hired to oversee the transition of the property. They stood like statues, unmoved by his bluster or his threats to have them fired. They didn't work for him. They worked for the holding company. And by extension, they worked for me. I watched as my mother hovered in the doorway, clutching a fur coat around her shoulders, her face pale and devoid of the polished makeup that usually served as her armor. She looked old. For the first time in my life, she looked fragile. But I felt no surge of pity. I only remembered her silence as my father told my daughter she was useless. Chloe was there too, pacing the driveway in her pajamas, frantically waving her phone in the air. I knew what she was discovering. Her fiancé, the rising star at the law firm, was a man who valued status above all else. I had sent him a courtesy email at midnight, a professional heads up that his future in-laws were currently undergoing a total asset liquidation. A man like him wouldn't stay attached to a sinking ship. In his world, a scandal was more contagious than a virus. By the way Chloe was sobbing into her phone, it was clear he had already given her the news. The engagement was a casualty of the war they had started. I decided it was time to give them the answers they were screaming for. I picked up my phone and dialed the landline of the house. It rang once before my father snatched it up. "Natalie, you miserable girl. What is the meaning of this? Get these people off my land." I leaned back in my chair, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "It's not your land, Dad. Check the deed transfer from July. You signed the power of attorney over to the primary creditor when you took that bridge loan to save your ego in Singapore. I'm the primary creditor. I bought your debt for pennies on the dollar because nobody else thought you were a good investment." The silence on the other end was heavy, filled with the sound of his ragged breathing. "You," he whispered, the rage replaced by a terrifying realization. "You don't have that kind of money. You're a failure." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I'm a failure in your world, Arthur. But in the world of venture capital and corporate restructuring, I'm the person people hired to clean up messes like you. I've been an Thorne for 5 years. I've made more in a single quarter than you made in the last decade. I just didn't tell you because I knew you'd try to steal it. Just like you tried to steal Lily's confidence last night. My mother must have been listening on the extension, because her voice broken, shrill and trembling. "Natalie, we're your parents. You can't do this to us. It's Christmas." I watched the screen as she stepped out onto the snow-dusted porch. "You told us to leave and never come back, Mom. You told Lily she didn't deserve to be part of a real family. Well, you were right about one thing: we don't belong with you. But this house doesn't belong to you either. The moving trucks will be there at noon. You're allowed to take your clothes and personal effects. Everything else, the art, the silver, the furniture stays. It's being auctioned off to fund a youth arts center." I hung up before they could respond. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that I could almost feel the air pressure change in the room. I spent the next few hours coordinating with my legal team. We were filing for a permanent injunction to prevent any of them from contacting Lily or me. I wanted a total severance. I wanted to be a ghost to them. A ghost that owned everything they once loved. I looked over at Lily, who was finally waking up. She rubbed her eyes and looked at me, a small smile forming on her face when she realized where we were. "Mom, do we have to go back to Grandpa's?" she asked, her voice small. "No, baby," I said, walking over to tuck a lock of hair behind her ear. "We're never going back there. We're going to find our own home, a place with a garden and a room for all your pains. And no one is ever going to tell you that you aren't enough." She hugged me tight, and for the first time in my adult life, the knot of anxiety in my stomach was gone. By noon, I checked the cameras again. The moving trucks had arrived. My parents were standing on the sidewalk, surrounded by a few designer suitcases, watching as the gates they had used to keep the world out were now locked against them. Chloe was sitting on the curb, her head in her hands. They looked like the very thing they had spent their lives looking down upon, people with nowhere to go. They had spent years building a kingdom on a foundation of cruelty, and they seemed shocked that the walls had finally crumbled. I closed my laptop. There was one more thing I had to do. The Thorne Group office downtown was the crown jewel of my father's vanity. He still thought he had a desk there. He still thought his name meant something on the 40th floor. He didn't know that the lease had been terminated, and the locks were being changed at this very moment. He was about to find out that when you lose your home, you often lose your identity along with it. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, biting clarity. While the rest of the city was slowly waking up from the holiday haze, I was standing in the lobby of the Thorne building, watching the reflection of the sunrise against the polished marble floors. I wasn't the trembling daughter who had been exiled from this lobby years ago for wanting to study art instead of corporate law. I was the owner. I watched as the maintenance crew began the painstaking process of prying the brass letters of my father's name from the wall. Each muffled thud of the chisel felt like a heartbeat of justice. By noon, the name Thorne would be gone, replaced by the Lily Foundation. My phone began to chime with a series of frantic notifications. My father had reached the building. The security feed from the entrance showed his black sedan pulling up to the curb. He stepped out, looking disheveled in a suit that was wrinkled from a night spent in a cheap motel. He tried to swipe his executive keycard at the glass turnstiles, but the light flashed a mocking, stubborn red. He swiped again, more violently this time, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He began to pound on the glass, shouting at the young security guard who stood on the other side. "Do you know who I am?" he screamed, his voice muffled by the thick reinforced panes. "I built this. This is my name on the door." The guard, following my exact instructions, didn't move an inch. He simply pointed to the wall where the letters were being removed. "There is no Thorne here, sir. He said through the intercom. Please vacate the premises before we call the authorities for trespassing. I stepped out from behind a decorative pillar, walking slowly toward the glass. My father froze when he saw me. His eyes widened, a mixture of recognition and a deep, soul-crushing terror. Natalie, open this door. Stop this madness right now, he bellowed. I stood just inches from him, separated only by the transparent barrier he had spent a lifetime reinforcing. I didn't need to shout. I leaned into the microphone at the desk. You told me I should leave and never come back. Dad, I took your advice. I left the person you wanted me to be, and I became the person who could survive you. You said Lily and I didn't deserve a real family, but a real family doesn't measure love in assets and grade point averages. You've lost everything because you forgot that the people you step on your way up are the only ones who can catch you on your way down. I turned my back on him then, listening to the desperate, hollow sound of his fists hitting the glass until the police arrived to escort him away. The fall of the rest of the family was just as swift. Chloe's fiancé didn't just break off the engagement. He released a statement to the legal community distancing himself from the Thorne family's financial irregularities. Chloe, who had never worked a real day in her life, found herself in a rented studio apartment with nothing but her clothes and a looming mountain of credit card debt I had refused to consolidate. My mother moved in with a distant cousin she had spent years mocking for being poor. The social circles that were her only oxygen closed their doors to her. Without the Thorne name and the Thorne money, she was a ghost in her own city. I took Lily to the park that afternoon. The snow was soft now, perfect for building the things children build when they feel safe. She didn't ask about her grandparents. She didn't ask about the big house. She just painted a picture of a small cottage with a bright yellow door and a garden full of flowers that shouldn't grow in winter. I realized then that while my parents had been busy trying to preserve a legacy of stone and steel, I had been building a legacy of resilience. I had used their own weapons to disarm them, and in doing so, I had ensured that the cycle of abuse ended with me. The Thorne estate was sold a month later. I didn't keep a single penny of the profit. Every cent went into a trust for Lily and into the foundation to help other women who had been told they were failures by the people who were supposed to love them. I kept only one thing from that house: the brass key I had placed on the dinner table. I kept it as a reminder that the doors people lock against you are often the very doors you eventually own. My father tried to sue, of course, but he had no grounds. He had signed every document, authorized every transfer, and walked into every trap with his eyes wide open, blinded by his own arrogance. As I sit here now, looking at the city skyline, I no longer feel the shadow of the man who tried to break me. I am Natalie. I am 32. I am a mother, a CEO, and a woman who knows exactly what she is worth. The revenge wasn't in the money or the buildings. It was in the silence that followed their noise. It was in the peace of a Christmas where no one was made to cry. I gave them exactly what they asked for. I left, and I made sure there was nothing left for me to come back to. If you enjoyed this story of standing your ground and reclaiming your life, please consider following for more stories where the underdog finally comes out on top. Thank you for listening to my journey. Please subscribe to my channel, My Calm Revenge.